Snow came down like torn lace that morning, sifted slow through the gray sky, softening the hard edges of the town. Still, nothing could muffle the sound of laughter rising from behind the stock pens, rough and careless. Men gathered with coffee steam curling from tin cups, boots crunching over frostbitten ground, eyes sharp and hearts dull with cruelty. The wind carried every word to the women standing beside the wooden auction block, barefoot and silent, their shawls too thin and their dignity thinner still. They stood shoulder to shoulder, four heavy-set women with wind-burned cheeks and red fingers. None spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence said what their mouths couldn't. We've run out of options. Delilah May's jaw was locked. Her coat was gone, traded 2 towns ago for flour and lard, and the one shawl she wore had been crocheted by her mother the year she turned 12. It barely covered her shoulders now. Her eyes, darker than storm clouds, swept the men with unflinching calculation. She wasn't afraid. She was beyond it. Beside her, Etta Rose clasped her hands like she might break into prayer, though her lips never moved. She had soft arms and a soft heart, but hard memories in her bones, of washing blood from sheets for a mistress who never looked her in the eye. Her apron, stained and patched, fluttered in the wind like a white flag that no one had asked for. Pearly Jane tugged the edge of her shawl down over her ears, her fingers shaking not from cold, but from being looked at. She hated being looked at. Hated the way it made her feel too large for the world. Her cheeks were pink, not from the snow but shame. She kept her eyes on the muddy ground, sketching invisible flowers with her boot toe. Marvell stood apart by a step, arms crossed tight. She wasn't crying, though her eyes glistened. Her father had called tears a weakness and her weight a punishment. She'd learned long ago that armor doesn't have to shine. Sometimes it just looks like bitterness. And yet, behind the defiance in her brow, something tender flickered, something she didn't let live long. The auction stage wasn't meant for people. It was made for cattle with slats too wide and nails sticking out. But the sheriff had called them up anyway, tipped his hat with mock civility and declared, "Ladies up for bid. Good with a broom, better with a biscuit, and winter warm if you're lonely." The crowd hooted. No one bid. A man with a gut like a whiskey barrel shouted, "I'll give a nickel if she sings while she works." Another chimed in, "I'll take the loud one to haul firewood." Laughter scattered across the square like dry corn husks in the wind. A few women from town watched from doorways, wrapped in furs, smug behind their husband's coin. Delilah's chin rose higher. Her pride was battered but not dead. Sheriff Dalton Clay held up his hands as if soothing a horse. "Now come on, boys. You're scaring 'em." "We ain't scared," Marvell snapped loud and clear. Clay grinned. "Well then, name your price." Delilah stepped forward. "Shelter. Through winter. A place to work. We're not beggin', we're tradin' to." Her voice cut through the jeers like a bell. For a moment, silence held. Then someone spat on the snow. "Ain't no man here got room for 4 hogs." Pearlie flinched. Etta Rose reached out, hand brushing hers, one small act of defiance. Marvell didn't move. Her jaw was clenched so tight her molars ached. She had sworn she'd never ask again. Never plead. Never let another man reduce her. Clay gestured lazily toward the livery stables. "Y'all can work there. Slop stalls warm the horses. Might even let you sleep under 'em." And then came the voice. "Oh, slow. Quiet as snowfall. I'll take them." Every head turned. The laughter stopped like a music box winding down. A tall figure stood near the edge of the square, half in shadow. Duster coat heavy with snow. Hat brim low, boots muddy, one heel slightly dragging like he walked with a memory too heavy to lift. Boaz Hale. Some folks thought he was deaf. Others thought he was dumb. All they knew was he spoke maybe twice a month and never for long. "I'll take them," he repeated, stepping into the light. Sheriff Clay frowned. "Take who?" Boaz pointed at the women. The sheriff chuckled, uncertain. "This ain't a trade post, Bo. You lookin' to start a harem?" Boaz didn't answer. Just reached into his coat and pulled out 4 silver dollars, bright, clean, untouched by mockery. He dropped them into the sheriff's hand. "Not for them," he said. "For the silence that should have greeted them." Delilah blinked. Marvell's arms fell to her sides. Etta Rose made a sound like a gasp swallowed too late. Pearlie looked up for the first time, her wide eyes searching his face for cruelty and finding none. Boaz turned to walk. The sheriff stared at the coins, unsure whether he'd been insulted or paid off. Boaz, you serious?" He kept walking. Delilah moved first, stepping down off the stage. Her bare feet sunk into snow, but she didn't flinch. Etta Rose followed, pulling Pearlie gently along. Marvell hesitated, then let out a huff and stormed after them. The town watched them like ghosts walking through a dream. Boaz said nothing as they caught up to him. He just slowed his gait enough to let them walk beside him. At the edge of town, Delilah's voice broke the quiet. "Why'd you do it?" He didn't answer. She looked down at his limp. "You need help or pity?" Still nothing. Then he stopped walking, turned, and finally met her eyes. "Can you cook?" Delilah blinked. "I can." He nodded once. "Then I suppose we're all fed." That night, the ranch smelled of damp wool, old wood smoke, and lard frying in a pan. Delilah worked silently at the stove, unfamiliar with the tools but steady of hand. Rose swept floors. Pearlie folded blankets Boaz had set out, though none of them had spoken since arriving. Marvell stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him as he moved, fixing a crooked coat hook, nailing a board over a draft. No commands. No expectations. Boaz worked like they belonged already. When he went out to check the livestock, Marvell followed. "You could have just let us rot." He didn't look up. "You're not rotting." "What do you want?" "Nothing." She didn't believe him. No man wanted nothing. But she didn't push it, not yet. That night, in a house too quiet for so many hearts, Pearlie stared at the rafters and whispered, "He didn't look at my body once. Just my face." Rose tucked her in. "Maybe he sees people where others see weight." Delilah sat by the fire, turning a spoon in her hand. Not stirring, just thinking. When Boaz returned from the cold, he placed a single apple on the table. "Only one." Delilah raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. "Only had 5. Figured you should get the first." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. The next morning, the sheriff visited the ranch. Watched them through the frost-covered fence slats. Watched them work, quietly without complaint. Delilah gathering eggs. Rose boiling water. Pearlie hanging damp laundry by the stove. Marvell splitting wood like she'd done it all her life. Boaz stood in the doorway watching him back. Clay raised his hand in mock salute. "If they cause trouble, I got room in the jail." Boaz didn't reply. Didn't need to. The door closed softly but with finality. Later that day, Sister Wren arrived with herbs and quiet kindness. She saw the women, didn't flinch, didn't stare. Simply handed Delilah a satchel of teas and left behind a note. "Your weight ain't what needs carry in. Let the past down for once." Delilah folded it slow. Slid it into her apron pocket. By evening, the house was still quiet, but warmer. Boaz repaired a broken chair, then left it beside the fire. Pearlie, unseen, drew his outline in thread on a scrap of sackcloth. Rose placed a pie in the window. No one asked for it. No one commented. But that night it was gone. Marvell watched all of this from the shadows, her fingers curling into fists that wanted to believe, but didn't dare. Then came the knock. One soft knock just before dawn. Boaz rose first. Opened the door. And found no one. Just a single note nailed to the post, flapping in the wind. "A man with 4 fat whores don't deserve land nor name. We're watching that." He stared at it a long moment. Then pulled it down, folded it once and set it in the fire. Behind him, 4 women watched, not knowing whether to run or brace for worse. Boaz turned, his face unreadable. And then, without drama, without pity, he said, "You'll need boots. Tomorrow's colder." The ranch sat quiet beneath a slate-gray sky, its roof stitched with frost and its porch sagging just a little leftward, like a tired old man leaning against the past. The wind didn't ask permission. It snuck through wall cracks and whistled under doors, cold and curious. The place wasn't ruined, but it wasn't ready for 5 people either. The door creaked open slowly, not because it was stuck, but because Delilah hesitated. Her eyes moved across the room, bare wooden floorboards, a potbelly stove with a dent in its side, shelves with just enough supplies to say someone lived here but not enough to say they expected company. There were no curtains on the windows. Just wide panes of wavy glass that let the world look in and let all the light leak out. Rose was the first to speak. "Feels like a house where sorrow doesn't echo. It just settles." Boaz didn't reply. He stepped past them and hung his coat on a peg by the door, limp leg dragging just slightly, boots leaving a trail of melted snow that hissed when it hit the hearth's edge. Pearlie hovered near the wall, her eyes flitting like a bird's. "Where should we?" Boaz pointed toward the far room. "You can sleep there. The floor creaks near the stove. Watch your step." That was all he said before stepping back out into the snow. For a while no one moved. Then Delilah crossed the room and opened the cupboards. 3 tins of beans. 2 sacks of cornmeal. A jar of pickled beets that hadn't been opened in years. I can make cornbread, she said mostly to herself. Etero's hands found a broom leaning against the wall. She picked it up without needing to be asked. Pearlie discovered a crate filled with old cloth. She knelt beside it and held up a faded flour sack with blue stenciling, her fingers already tugging thread from the edges. Her mind went quiet when she worked, and that silence was something she'd been starving for. Marvell didn't move. She stood at the window, arms crossed, jaw set like iron. He's not what he seems. Delilah didn't look up. Neither are we. Night came fast, and with it the ache of exhaustion. Boaz returned just before supper, setting a wrapped parcel on the table, dried venison and a heel of rye bread. He didn't say where he got it. Didn't need to. Delilah took it without comment, added it to the pot, and let the steam fog the glassless windows as she stirred. The room smelled like something close to comfort. They sat around the table but didn't speak much. Boaz chewed slow, eyes on his plate. When he was done, he nodded once, an odd little thing that felt like grace, and went to stoke the fire. Pearlie rose to clear the dishes. Eteros joined her. Delilah lingered, her hand resting on the tabletop as if she could feel the heartbeat of the house through the wood. Marvell stood last. I don't trust quiet men, she muttered, stepping out onto the porch where the cold could match the sting in her bones. The next morning the sun arrived weak and indifferent, more light than warmth. Snow clung to the window panes like frostbitten lace. Pearlie was the first to rise. She sewed by the fire, tiny stitches pulling the flour sack into something curtain-shaped. Eteros boiled water on the stove, humming under her breath, an old tune about a bird with broken wings learning to sing again. It didn't matter if the words were remembered. What mattered was that they came from a place untouched by cruelty. Boaz entered carrying firewood. Set it down without comment. Paused a moment when he saw the cloth in Pearlie's lap. That for the windows? Pearlie nodded, nervous. They let the cold in. I thought maybe it'd help. Boaz considered. Then, there's nails in the drawer. And a hammer in the shed. He left again and Pearlie exhaled like she'd been holding it for a week. Delilah stepped out later to check the hens. There were only 3 and one was too old to lay. She touched their combs gently like apology, then scraped frost off the water bucket with her sleeve. Boaz joined her after a while. She didn't speak but handed him the empty egg pail. He looked down at it, then at her. You always cook like that? Delilah shrugged. Like what? Like you're feeding ghosts. She looked away, jaw tightening. I guess I am. He didn't press. Just nodded once and said, they were warm ghosts. That afternoon, Marvell stormed in from the porch, cheeks flushed with anger. They're talking again. Delilah didn't ask who. She knew. Said you bought us like cattle. Said you're building a brothel. Boaz didn't even blink. Then let them come see. Is that all you're gonna say? He looked at her. Not down, not past, at her. I don't trade in shame, Miss Marvell. Never have. She stared at him, eyes searching for a lie and finding none. Eteros placed a tin of salve in Boaz's hand. For your leg. It's witch-made, she said with a faint smile. Hope you don't mind witches. I mind people who harm, Boaz said softly. Not people who heal. The days passed with slow, deliberate rhythm. Snow kept falling. Wood kept burning. Meals were made, things fixed, silences filled with the kind of labor that didn't ask for gratitude but often earned it anyway. Pearlie hung her curtains one by one, blue-stitched sacks that made the windows glow softly when firelight touched them. Delilah cooked like her hands were remembering a time before hunger. She whistled once, low and steady, and everyone froze. It was the first sound like joy they'd heard in weeks. Boaz said nothing, but his hand lingered an extra beat on the doorframe when he walked out that night. Marvell found herself splitting wood beside him one morning. She didn't offer and he didn't ask. You were a soldier? She finally said. He nodded. You kill people? He didn't answer. Marvell swung the axe once, clean through. I did. Boaz looked at her then, really looked. You survived. That's enough. Something shifted in her. Not trust, not yet. But something less hard. That evening someone left a bundle by the gate. 4 pairs of boots, used but whole, and a note scrawled in red ink, better warm than whoring. Boaz brought them in without a word. Left them by the hearth. Eteros whispered, You think it's pity? Delilah shook her head. It's a start. The next day, Sister Wren arrived, cheeks wind-chapped, hands full of yarn and honey. Town's loud with judgment, she said as she handed over the bundle. But loudness ain't truth. It's just scared people shouting so they don't have to listen. She kissed Pearlie's forehead before leaving. Later, Delilah found Boaz out in the pasture fixing fence posts. She stood watching him a long time. "Why us?" she asked. "You didn't stop working." "Just said, you didn't break when they wanted you to." "That's not the same as being whole." "No," he agreed. "It's braver." She helped hold the wire after that. Neither spoke again. That night the ranch felt different. Not safe. Not free from judgment. But something had rooted there, something that didn't shrink in the face of winter or whispers. Etta Rose sang by the fire. Pearlie finished the last curtain. Marvell stood beside her, arms no longer crossed, watching the cloth sway. Boaz sat in the corner, mending a leather strap. Every so often his gaze lifted toward the window where warm light spilled through stitched blue. The house had curtains now, but the town still had eyes. Just before bed, Marvell stepped out into the snow. The wind had teeth that night. She walked to the fence post and stared down the road that led back to Judgment. She stood there a long time. Then, behind her, the door creaked open. Boaz stood in the glow of lamplight, holding a blanket. He didn't speak, just held it out. She took it. Didn't thank him. Didn't need to. Because for the first time, someone had seen her cold and not asked what she'd done to deserve it. The frost had thickened to ice and the sun hung low, always trailing the horizon like it too was reluctant to rise in a town that didn't make room for warmth. January wore its weight like shame, gray and heavy, and on every doorpost, breath curled like ghosts above steaming coffee. In the general store, gossip came cheap and loud. "Did you hear?" barked Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, leaning hard on the counter where molasses candy was sold by the inch. 4 of them still at that ranch. Godless as goats. "Boaz Hale's gone plain mad," said Hank Turley, shaking out a newspaper no one read. "First he comes back from war without a word, now he's harboring women no decent man claim." Behind the curtain of the store's rear shelf, Sister Wren stood very still, fingers wrapped around a jar of calendula salve. Her face gave nothing away, but her heart ached like old wood before a storm. "They say one's already expectin'," whispered another voice, too low to name but loud enough to harm. "And that big one with the axe?" She spit at the sheriff's horse. "That ain't even a sin. That's a miracle." The laughter was mean. Loud. It echoed off pickle jars and dry goods bins and wedged itself into walls, where it would linger long after the doors shut. Across town, the women didn't yet know what was being said. Not in detail. But they felt it. You could always feel when folks were aiming words at your back. Etta Rose was mending Boaz's long johns by the stove when Pearlie burst in from the porch, cheeks red from more than just the cold. They said it again. Delilah looked up from where she was kneading dough. "What?" "They called us the 4 Hogs of Hale Ranch." Marvell dropped the axe she'd been sharpening, the sound like thunder in a small church. "Let me go talk to them." Delilah shook her head. "And say what? That we're fat, not fools?" Pearlie was pacing now, breath shallow. "One boy said he'd pay a nickel to ride me around town in a cart. Said I'd make a fine mule." Boaz stood in the doorway. He hadn't meant to interrupt, but he didn't step back either. Pearlie's eyes filled when she saw him. "They think we belong in barns." He looked at her a moment, then walked over, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't answer folks who ain't asking for truth," he said. "They wouldn't hear it if you sang it in church." Etta Rose spoke softly, "But we live here now, and they don't forget. They don't forgive." Boaz looked toward the window where the snow blurred the fields. "They will." Marvell scoffed. "You think silence is going to change minds?" "No," Boaz said. "But living does." The next morning, Delilah walked into town alone. Her boots crunched over ice as she made her way to the bakery. She didn't rush. Didn't hide. She stood straight and still as wind tugged her shawl and eyes followed her like crows. Inside the bakery she picked up flour, butter, and 2 jars of jam. Mrs. Whitmore stared at her like she was something scraped off a boot heel. "That all?" Delilah laid the coins down one by one, letting them clink like dropped truths. Mrs. Whitmore sniffed. "Mighty bold walkin' in here like a bride." Delilah met her gaze. "Just needed flour, ma'am. Didn't know bold was extra." The woman said nothing, just bagged the items with a tight jaw. But Delilah left with her head high and a cinnamon stick tucked in beside the jam. A gift not given aloud. At home she baked pies. Pearlie added a touch of nutmeg. Etta Rose carved slits in the crust like stars. Marvell refused to help, then stirred the jam until it simmered anyway. They ate in silence, warm apples melting on their tongues. Later that week, Boaz rode into town for nails and fencing wire. At the smithy, Sheriff Clay leaned against a post like he owned the dirt under it. "You plan on marrying all 4, Boaz?" he asked, voice slick with grin. Boaz didn't look up. Not your business, Sheriff. It is if they keep turning this town into a circus. Boaz handed over the coins, kept his voice even. Ain't my women you need to worry about. Clay's grin faltered. They're not yours. Boaz looked at him then long and slow. No, he said. They're theirs. The blacksmith, old Gowan with a hammer for a heart, said nothing, but slipped an extra handful of nails into Boaz's sack when no one was looking. That night, Etta Rose took a walk. The stars were sharp above, stitched between clouds like someone had tried to mend the sky and only halfway finished. She passed the chapel. Light was on. Inside, Sister Wren sat alone with a hymnal open and dust falling like hope. Didn't expect company, she said. Etta Rose smiled. Didn't expect courage. They sat together for a while, neither saying much. But sometimes silence shared with a kind soul feels louder than shouting. Back at the ranch, Pearlie was sewing again. Only this time not curtains. She was making a dress. Not slim. Not small. But strong. Full of bright blue thread and soft folds. For Easter, she said. It's February, Delilah replied. Pearlie smiled without showing teeth. That means I got time. Marvell came in from the barn. Someone left something by the gate. They all stepped outside. There, nestled in the snow, was a bundle of firewood. And a note. You cook better than my wife. No offense. Marvell read it 3 times. We're not invisible. Delilah nodded. We never were. Boaz returned from the barn with a small wooden crate. Inside it, 4 jars of preserved peaches. From his private stash. No note, no explanation. He set them on the table and walked away. Marvell followed him. She didn't speak, just handed him the note. Is it pity? She asked. Boaz took a long breath. It's a crack. In what? In the wall they built to stay feeling bigger. Marvell stared at the peach jars. Feels like they don't want us, but they don't know how to stop needing us. Most men ain't brave enough to name the difference. The next day, a mother from town left her child at the ranch gate. 6 years old, shivering, clutching a ripped satchel. She said she'll be back, the girl whispered. Boaz brought her in. Pearlie fed her porridge. Etta Rose wrapped her in quilts. Delilah checked her feet for frostbite. When the mother returned, red-faced and ashamed, Marvell stood by the door, arms crossed. She's warm, she said. You want her cold again? The mother couldn't meet her eyes. Just took her child's hand and said, Thank you. Boaz didn't say a word the whole time. Just watched the door long after it shut. By week's end, snow began to melt. A little. Just enough for mud to show its face. And with it came the last straw. A boy, no older than 14, walked by the ranch and shouted loud enough to echo. Fat witches. Hell's hogs. Got any room left in the sty? Pearlie flinched so hard she dropped her sewing. Etta Rose closed her eyes. Marvell stepped outside, axe in hand. Delilah caught her arm. No, she said. They want fire. Don't give it to them. Boaz came around from the back. He said nothing. Just picked up the fallen spool of thread and placed it in Pearlie's hand. Then quietly he walked to the front gate and fixed a sign in the ground. Not for sale. Not ashamed. Not leaving. Later they found Pearlie's drawing tucked inside her mending basket. It was of the ranch, curtains fluttering, smoke from the chimney, and 5 figures standing in a doorway. No faces. Just outlines stitched in soft blue thread. She titled it, What the Town Can't Carry. The next morning the sheriff rode up again. But this time he wasn't alone. He had papers. Charges. Moral disturbance, unsanctioned housing, and conduct unbecoming of Christian settlement. Boaz read the words slow. And steady. You want us gone? He asked. Clay smiled. You or them. Your choice. Inside, the women watched through the curtain-slit windows. They couldn't hear what was said, but they could see Boaz's jaw tighten. Then he turned around and stepped back inside. Delilah met his eyes. He said only one thing. Pack what you need. They're going to try. The wind changed that night. Not colder, meaner. It snapped through fence slats like it was looking for something to break, dragging smoke with it and the scent of something unnatural riding just behind. Inside the ranch house, the fire crackled low. Etta Rose stirred soup while Pearlie stitched buttons onto a coat Boaz had mended the week before. Delilah sat at the table rolling pie dough in slow, deliberate circles. Marvell watched the windows. Boaz hadn't spoken in hours. He stood by the back door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon like it might come closer if he stared long enough. Then came the smell, sharp, oily, wrong. Boaz was out the door before words found shape. "Fire!" he shouted, voice rough with the kind of fear that doesn't run, it fights. The barn was already licking orange into the dark sky, flames hungrily devouring dry hay and pine beams. Sparks danced like cursed stars, drifting toward the house. They moved as one. Delilah and Etta Rose grabbed buckets, filled them from the pump until their arms ached. Pearlie dumped every pan she could find into the wash basin. Marvell kicked snow into the growing blaze, her skirt catching a stray cinder that she stamped out with a boot heel and curse. Boaz shouted instructions, voice firm but never frantic. "Wet the wall, there by the porch beam. Keep it from jumping." The air grew thick. Smoke coiled through breath and thought. Pearlie's eyes stung, but she didn't stop. She moved in rhythm with Delilah now, passing buckets, her thin arms steadier than they'd ever been. The fire roared, greedy and wild. And still they fought. By dawn, the barn was nothing but a charred rib cage. But the house still stood, blackened in spots. Smoke stung, but whole. Marvell stood at the edge of the ash, one hand burned and blistered where she'd saved a crooked-legged chair her father made from scrap oak. She didn't say a word, just held the wood like something sacred. Delilah collapsed into the snow, arms trembling. It wasn't an accident. Boaz nodded once. No, it wasn't. The town had sent its message. Pearlie wrapped Marvell's hand in soaked linen. Etta Rose leaned against the porch post, eyes rimmed with ash and sleep. "We should leave," Delilah whispered. "Where would we go?" Pearlie asked. "Anywhere they don't look at us like monsters." Boaz sat down on the steps, smoke still trailing from the hem of his coat. "They looked at me like that too," he said softly. "When I came home limping. When I didn't talk. They said I must have done something unholy to survive while better men didn't." He didn't look up, didn't raise his voice. "Truth is, survival ain't righteous. It's just stubborn." No one spoke for a while. The snow fell lighter now, quieting what fire had tried to claim. Later that morning, a knock came at the gate. It was Sister Wren. Her eyes scanned the ruins, her hand over her heart. "They crossed a line," she said. "Even the cowards are ashamed." Marvell snorted. Funny how quick shame shows up after damage. Wren stepped closer. "I came to warn you. Clay's drawing up charges. Something about squatting, disorderly conduct, immorality. He'll make it official tomorrow." Boaz looked toward the smoke, then back at the house. "Let him." That afternoon, Delilah found herself washing soot from the porch boards. Not because she needed to, but because it gave her hands something to do while her mind splintered. Boaz came beside her with a hammer and fresh boards. "I'll help," he said. She didn't look up. "You always fix what ain't yours?" He paused. "Sometimes fixing what no one claims is the only honest work left." She stopped scrubbing. Her voice broke before her words did. "They were going to burn us alive." "I know. We could have died." Boaz placed the board down. "But you didn't." She looked at him, then really looked. And he met her eyes without fear, pity, or hunger. Just steady knowing. Delilah stood slowly. Her hand brushed his, not long, not on purpose. But neither pulled away. That night no one slept. Marvell sat by the hearth, holding her burnt hand in her lap like it might speak if she waited long enough. Etta Rose made tea with herbs Sister Wren had left. Pearlie stayed curled on the cot near the stove, drawing silent prayers in charcoal on scraps of wood. Boaz stood guard by the door. Delilah brought him a bowl of stew. "Cold already?" she said. He nodded. "Took it anyway." "You don't have to keep watch," she added. "Yes, I do." In the quiet, she asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" Boaz didn't answer right away. Then, "No. I think about what it could be if people stopped guarding their cruelty like treasure." Outside, the wind picked up again. It carried with it the sound of a horse's hooves. Marvell moved first, grabbing the shotgun they'd never had reason to use. Boaz opened the door slowly. It was Sheriff Clay. He sat tall on his mare, gloves clean, face smug. "Just come to inform you," he called. "Papers'll be ready by noon. Court'll hear it quick. No fuss. You're out within the week." He looked past Boaz at the women gathered behind him. "Take your whores and find another barn." Marvell stepped forward, gun still at her side. "Say it again." Boaz raised a hand, not to stop her, but to hold the air still. "Anything else?" he asked. Clay smirked. "Oh, and tell the preacher woman, Wren, that she's due for a fine if she don't mind her sermons." He turned his horse. But before he rode off, Boaz said, "You'll regret pressing this." Clay looked back, the grin wide and hollow. "Not likely." After he disappeared down the trail, Marvell exhaled hard. "He wants to break us." Eteros whispered, "Then we hold." Delilah stepped beside Boaz. "He'll drag us out in chains." Boaz didn't blink. "Then he'll have to lift us first." Pearlie spoke from behind, voice fragile but sure. "I'll sew us proper clothes. If we're going to fight, we don't do it in soot." That night they all sat around the fire. The flames low but alive. Marvell unwrapped her hand. The blisters had started to peel. Pearlie gave her a salve without speaking. Boaz leaned forward, gaze locked on the glowing coals. He finally asked, "If you had to tell them one thing, just one, what would it be?" Delilah answered first. "That we ain't for sale." Eteros, "That weight ain't sin." Pearlie, "That softness isn't weakness." Marvell's voice was quieter than any of them expected. "That burning us down won't make them any cleaner." Boaz nodded once. "I'll go to town tomorrow." Delilah frowned. "For what?" He looked up, eyes dark and still. "For a lawyer. And a hammer." The courtroom smelled of ink and pine and too many men wearing old sweat under fresh coats. The benches were packed. Word had spread fast, quicker than justice ever did. Folks came not because they cared but because they craved spectacle. A man with 4 fat women, dragged in for decency. It made for good gossip and better judgment. Boaz stood alone near the front, coat buttoned high, shoulders squared. He'd shaved. Not for pride, but because dignity demanded no slouching, no stink, and no excuses. Behind him, the 4 women sat in a row, their new dresses handmade by Pearlie. Stitched blue, with hems heavy from hours of quiet defiance. They sat tall, eyes ahead, as if they'd already survived the verdict. Sheriff Clay leaned against the witness bench like it was built for his spine. He wore a smirk and a gold watch he hadn't earned. "Boaz Hale," he said with mock civility, "harboring unsanctioned females, maintaining a brothel, and defying moral code." He turned to the judge with a bow of his head. "This is a case of lawlessness hidden behind pie crusts and pity." The judge, old and gray with eyes like wet gravel, looked to Boaz. "You have representation?" Boaz said, "I speak for myself." A quiet ripple passed through the room. Clay grinned. "Of course you do." The judge sighed. "Proceed." Boaz stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. It was the kind that traveled far on purpose, like thunder that chose where it landed. "I did bring those women home. I fed them. I gave them boots. I fixed a broken stove so they wouldn't freeze. If that's a crime in this town, I'll take the punishment." Clay rolled his eyes. "You left out the fornication, Hale?" Boaz turned to him slowly. "There's more decency at my dinner table than in any of your sentences." Gasp. Someone stood and left. Another laughed, then caught himself. Boaz faced the judge again. No one asked why they were standing barefoot in snow that day. No one asked what they'd already survived to get there. The only question was how fast you could shame them. The judge raised a hand. "You're not a preacher, son?" "No," Boaz said. "Just a man tired of silence." Delilah stood then. She didn't wait for permission. "They call me a cow. A hog. But I've cooked for widows, soldiers, and the preacher's wife herself. No one ever said a word until I stood too tall beside a man who wouldn't look away from me." Pearlie rose. "They said I was too big to be loved. So I stopped speaking. Now I sew because the needle never calls me names." Eteros stepped forward. "They want us gone. But not because we did wrong. It's because we remind them what mercy looks like when it's shaped like us." Marvell stepped up last. Her burned hand was unwrapped now, scars pink and proud. "I got spit on. Lit on fire. Judged by boys who've never gone hungry. If that's what this town calls justice, then you better sentence the snow for falling too heavy." The room had gone silent. Sister Wren stood in the back. Alone. She raised her voice like scripture. "The Lord sat with women others cast out. Maybe that's what scares you." Clay barked, "This isn't church." Boaz turned to him. "You're right. It's a reckoning." The judge stared long and quiet, then laid his pen down. "I see no crime here. Only shame poorly hidden in law. Case dismissed." The gavel came down like thunder. Boaz didn't flinch. Neither did the women. Outside, the townsfolk parted as they walked past, not out of respect, but because something in them knew better now. Not everyone, but enough. Back at the ranch, the snow had melted just enough to reveal grass underneath, thin and unsure but alive. Boaz stopped at the gate. Delilah beside him. "You could have let us burn," she said. He nodded. "So could you." Inside the house, Marvell hung her burned chair piece above the hearth. Pearlie pressed their court papers flat between 2 pans. Eteros set the table without a word but with 3 extra plates, just in case. Boaz reached up, drove one last nail into the top of the doorframe, and hung a small carved sign. Not for sale. Not ashamed. Not leaving. Behind him the fire crackled, and someone, maybe Pearlie, started humming. The sound drifted soft into the wind, where it met the thawing earth and stayed.